Chair. We are now live on YouTube. Over to you.
Well, thank you, Wendy. First of all, I would like to thank Amanda for stepping in. Sorry, I'll start again. I'd like to thank Amanda for stepping in for Sarah, who is indisposed this morning. Amanda's done this at very short notice, so thank you to Amanda for doing that. Anyway, good morning and welcome to this virtual meeting of the Poverty Working Panel on Monday, 7th of December 2020. I am your chair, Councillor Megan Armstrong. I would also like to welcome anyone watching the meeting via the live streaming. All participants here today are taking part remotely, and as well as being live streamed, the meeting is being recorded. So please bear this in mind throughout, and may I remind you to be careful with your language. May I also remind members that the Code of Conduct applies throughout this meeting. We also reserve the right to remove and disconnect any participant who is disrupting the meeting by whatever means. Please turn any telephone devices off or to silent. As with all meetings, we are dependent on internet connection and a power supply. In the event of a break in the internet connection or a power cut, please bear with us as we try to reconnect. If we are not able to reconnect after 15 minutes, the meeting will be adjourned and reconvened at a later date. Please check the committee page on our website for details. Please make sure all microphones are muted when you are not speaking to avoid any background noise levels. Please keep your points short and do not repeat points that have already been made, and do not interrupt when someone is speaking. If you wish to comment, please raise your electronic blue hand and wait to be called. All councillors have been sent the agenda and accompanying reports for today's meeting. We will now start the meeting by doing a roll call of the members of the working panel. Can you please now unmute your microphone, and when you hear your name, please confirm by saying present. When you have confirmed you're present, please mute your microphone again. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll do this in alphabetical order. So starting with Councillor Allen.
Yes, I'm here, Wendy.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor De Sarum.
Present. Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you. Councillor Hawkins.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Jarvis.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor King, I've been advised that Councillor King has a prior engagement and will do his best to join the meeting later, so hopefully he can make it. Councillor Miller.
Present.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Rixon.
Present.
Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Wendy. I can confirm we are quorum today. So agenda item 1, which is public speaking. We have 3 public speakers today who will have 3 minutes to speak with a 30-second reminder. So I'd like to welcome Gillian Adamson and Ben Reid, who are here in the meeting. Gillian Adamson, would you like to introduce yourself? Could you say where you're from and what is your interest in attending this meeting? And then begin your 3 minutes. Thank you.
Yes, I live in Exmouth, in Elmfield Crescent, and my interest in this meeting is I'm very interested in the homelessness situation in Exmouth, having just been helping a homeless person recently, who, thank goodness, is now in bed and breakfast. But really what I'd like to say is I would like a quicker response by the council to rough sleepers if possible, and homelessness in general in Exmouth. I think the attitude of the council is a bit slow sometimes. If I could make a couple of suggestions. Recently, Exmouth Friends in Need came to the aid of a homeless man who was sleeping in a doorway in a shop in Exmouth. And they all rallied round him. This is a Facebook group, Exmouth Friends in Need, and they gave him food and clothing. And then one lovely man eventually offered him a caravan to stay in until he got himself on his feet. He was very, very pleased to take this caravan, and Exmouth Friends in Need gave him bedding and a kettle and a toaster, everything you could think of. So my attitude to this is brilliant. Could the council not do the same thing for homeless people? Could they not provide some caravans somewhere? For example, Mare Road car park. Now, that has got the electricity, and they were going to have showers there, weren't they? And power points that people could plug into. But even if that wasn't the case, if just 2 or 3 caravans could be put on Mare Road car park for homeless people as a temporary stopgap, it would be brilliant for them. I know they'd be thrilled, having been speaking to homeless man recently. Just as a stopgap for them, somewhere secure for them to sleep and be. And if not that, how about buying up one of the hotels that have come empty? That'd be cheaper in the long run than putting them in bed and breakfast, wouldn't it? Which must be £30–40 a night each person. And if you did buy up a hotel and made each room self-contained for these homeless people, that would be wonderful for them. And you'd always have that facility. I just feel both those suggestions might be looked at, especially the caravans, because you can pick up caravans really quite cheaply at the moment. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Gillian. You'd be pleased to know that we are constantly looking into ways in which we can help homeless people. Street homeless actually are a very, very small minority. I know it may seem as if there are more, but they are a very small minority in the district generally. But they are, of course, very important and something that my heart is very close to.
Well, there are 11 at the moment. There are 11 homeless people.
So yes, I'm sure there are. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for your comments, and we'll certainly bear them in mind. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'd like now, Ben Reid, would you be able to introduce yourself, say where you're from and what your interest is in attending this meeting, and then begin your 3 minutes. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Ben Reid. I live in Exmouth, and I want to speak about the homeless. To tell you a little bit about myself, over the last 25 years, I've worked in homeless hostels like Gabriel House in Exeter, Shilhay, St Petrox, which is a drop-in centre that's in Exeter on the Cathedral. I've worked for Stonham, which was a homeless hostel for 16 to 21-year-olds. I've worked for Insight, which used to be a drug and substance misuse. And I've also worked in Alexander House, which is in Exmouth. And also what I do now is I do street food and events. I've done that for the last 5 years. Regarding the homeless person that was in town, Ian, his name was, that got the caravan. It was me that sorted the caravan out for it.
I'm sorry, but could I just interrupt you there, please? Could you not mention individual names, because this is publicly available, and okay. We don't want to embarrass anybody by stating their name.
That's absolutely fine. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Well, the person that was living on the street, he was there for about 3 weeks, and all he got while he was there from the council was one person come out and speak to him, and all they could offer him was a train ticket out of Exmouth, which I don't think is acceptable. Me and my 2 kids used to go regular and give him food and stuff like that. I managed to, when I found out that he got offered a train ticket, I contacted one of my friends that own a construction company, and they donated a caravan, which we sorted out for him. and also contacted Exmouth Friends in Need, which she was absolutely brilliant, and the local community give him everything he needed. And he's been in there 2 weeks now, and he's managed in the last 2 weeks managed to sort out a job. So he's working, and he's got a bounce in his step. He's very motivated and stuff like that. When it come to his caravan, I said to him, I said, "Are you going to sell that?" And he didn't. He gave it to the next homeless person that had been sleeping rough behind Exmouth Rugby Club, and he's been there for a good few months now. But like again, he's in the caravan, and he was known to the council, and again didn't have anybody from the council go and speak to him. I don't know if you saw, but this was then in the paper. This was in the paper, which was really good. That this was the first public bit about homelessness in the paper, which was positive. I was going to name about a couple of other homeless people again, but I've run out of time. I just want to say a big thank you to Paul Miller, who's been really helpful and enthusiastic about helping the homeless. And hopefully we're going to get something sorted to make it so they can have more contact and help. There you go. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ben. Now then, we have a short statement from Claire Austin from Exmouth Friends in Need and Furniture Poverty, which will be read out by Amanda. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you, Chair. Exmouth Friends in Need was started just under 2 years ago to help alleviate short-term poverty within the community, usually caused by a sudden change in an individual's or family's circumstance. Primarily, the main focus was ensuring that people had sufficient food, but as time has gone on, we now not only focus on this aspect, but also provide help with heating and furniture. There are countless families and individuals in the Exmouth area who do not have the means to properly furnish their homes, and Exmouth Friends in Need do their very best to help where we can. We also get many indirect referrals from the council's housing department to help with those who have nothing. The local community is very good at passing on old furniture, but sometimes this is barely fit for purpose and not suitable. Unfortunately, we sometimes have to turn down quality furniture as we have no immediate homes to give this to, and also nowhere to store it. There is, of course, quite a large second-hand furniture market, but in these COVID times, most of our funding is being spent on food and heating. We understand that the council is trying to develop an initiative to address furniture poverty, and Exmouth Friends in Need would very much welcome such a scheme. Support could come in a number of ways, not just targeting funding, but perhaps a small storage area or help with logistics when it comes to moving larger items. Please contact us if you would like to discuss any of these points further. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. I'll just say on that one that we are certainly, as part of the homelessness strategy, we are looking into setting up what's called a magic garage for exactly this sort of reason. It is happening at the moment. Council officers are dealing with the furniture issue, but it needs to be more formalised. And that's what we're working towards. And we will certainly be working, if we're not already, which I think we are, we'll be working with voluntary organisations and other agencies in order to bring that about. So yes, we can keep in touch with Claire as and when this progresses. So thank you very much. I'd just like to thank everybody for their contributions. So Jill and Ben, you will be now put back into the waiting room. And if you wish, you may continue to watch the meeting on the council's YouTube channel. Thank you.
Chair, could I please come in for a moment while Jill Adamson is there, just to answer a point that she made, please?
Yes, if you like. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. With regard to the hotels, the use as temporary accommodation for homeless people. Those hotels, and I know which ones they are in principal holiday accommodation areas. So we do need that for holiday accommodation, which of course helps support the local economy. That's the only point I wanted to make.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Wragg, very much. So if we'd like to move on to item 2, which is apologies. Thank you. Apologies have been received from, would Amanda like to read that out, please? Or
Yes,
Wendy?
Chair, you have apologies from Councillor Wibley, one of your members, and also non-member Councillor Ian Hall.
Thank you very much. I had a feeling there was somebody else. Oh yes, I think Councillor Young, Jeff Young, has also said that he's going to try and get into the meeting later if he possibly can, but he can't do the first part of the meeting. He's a non-member, so thank you. And Fabian King, have we had apologies from Fabian?
I believe he's in the
Yes,
meeting
I did
now.
send apologies, but I am
Oh,
now.
sorry, Fabian, you're there. Oh, right. Oh, thank you. That's good to see you. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, right. So could we now have agenda item 3, declarations of interest? Declarations of interest will be noted by raising your electronic blue hand. If you have an interest, please now raise your blue hand and advise the type of interest and the reason. Thank you. I think we have Councillor Rylance there.
Thank you, Chair. With regard to the report, I'm involved in Broadclist Food Bank. So I guess if we make any decisions about any grants to any food banks, then that would be a personal interest, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I doubt we'll be making decisions on things like
Okay.
that. But thank you for raising it anyway. Thank you. Okay. Councillor Allen.
Yes, similarly, I'm involved in the food bank in Honiton through our church and a number of other initiatives to minimise poverty through the church there.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a member of the executive of Nourish, a group in Axminster providing meals for those in poverty. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hayward. And Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. I've done some volunteering work for Exmouth Friends in Need, and I have a part-time job for Co-op Group, which also raises money for food banks and similar charities. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. I think that's all. Can anybody see any others? I don't think so. Thank you. So agenda item 4, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 11th of November 2020. The draft meetings of the previous meeting on 11th of November have been circulated. If any members have comments on the minutes, please raise your electronic blue hand. If there are no blue hands raised, I will take it that the minutes of the previous meeting are approved. Could I just say at this point, I have a, does everybody agree that the minutes are correct, first of all, because I have a comment to make on them when we've agreed that first. Thank you.
Councillor Miller has his hand up.
Yeah, Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. It's not very easy for me to know whether the minutes are accurate because there's no recording of the previous meeting. And I just wanted to make a comment to ask why the previous 2 meetings were held behind closed doors, why they weren't held publicly. And also, could I plead with the Chair that in the future meetings are held in the evening so various councillors who have full-time jobs can attend? Because we can see there's a great amount of interest in these meetings. And we can see by the 3 public speakers today that these meetings need to be held in public always going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Yes, we'll no doubt discuss all those issues later on, I think. Could I just say that I have a comment about it was a query that was raised by Councillor Chapman at the last meeting about domestic violence and refuges. So I'd just like to say that during recent months, there has been a notable increase in presentations from those fleeing domestic violence. There are no refuges in East Devon, but we have a place of safety in partnership with a local organisation. The nearest refuge is in North Devon, with another in North Somerset, 2 in Cornwall and 1 in Torquay. 2 weeks ago, all of these were full. So therefore, in those circumstances, we have to use either bed and breakfast or holiday lets. I'm hoping that covers what Councillor Chapman asked at the last meeting, but if she would like to comment on that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I had heard that the situation was quite dire, and I think to have an area as large as East Devon without a safe house it doesn't reflect well on any of us, and I think it is something we really need to look at in obtaining a safe house, because I think this is going to go on for a few more months, and I think we really need to do something about it, because I can't think of a worse situation for a young mother or a young father being caught in a situation like this with no way out. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Chapman. Yes, we're well aware of that, more than well aware of it. So yes, it's about resources again, isn't it? It's the usual thing, but yes.
Yes, it's the usual problem, but I think when people's lives are at risk, it is something we really need to address.
Well, it's not that we don't deal with these issues. It's just that we don't have a specific refuge. We do have, as I said, places of safety for people, which is different. So they are dealt with, they are helped. It's just that it's not an ideal position when refuges are full. So I agree with that. Thank you very much for raising it. Right, so I'd like us now to move on to one of our main items for today. Item 5, poverty and the economy. Presentation by Andy Wood, Service Lead, Growth, Development and Prosperity. You'll remember that at the last meeting, we agreed to invite an officer from each of the strategic objective areas to lead on 4 of our planned meetings, to allow us to explore each subject in more detail and thereby to contribute to the strategy. So today we are looking at the economy, and I will now invite Andy Wood to give his presentation. Thank you very much, Andy.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, councillors. Just going to share my screen. Oops. Get rid of that. So, as you've introduced, I'm just going to, well, I've got quite a few slides. I've got 20 slides or so. I'm going to run through the relationship between poverty and the economy. Important to say up front, we're obviously at a very interesting moment in time in terms of where we are in relation to the pandemic, what might happen at the turn of the year as well, and hopefully try to capture some of the kind of contemporary data and to look at what the outlook might be. But I was going to start here, which was, is there a relationship between, if you like, economic performance and poverty? I did a quick kind of Google search last year, and this was some US research, the National Bureau of Economic Research. Obviously, a copy of the slides will be coming through, so I won't read it all out in detail. Essentially, what it did was it looked at the unemployment rate, median wages as a measure of income inequality and region, and it concludes that there is a relationship between economic performance and unemployment and the poverty rate. And if you look at the final kind of paragraph there, as it concludes, it makes sense that poverty rates are related to the overall health of the economy. And it references their economic growth in relation to improving household incomes and helping families. And obviously we are in an exceptionally challenging period at the moment where we have seen economic decline in the recent months, albeit that we're now in a period of growth again. But that is, I think, an important kind of starting point. There is a relationship there overall, and that, as you see there, that was tracked over a long period of time. So just some kind of headlines to start with. Important to say up front, poverty is not the same as having a low income. I'll come back to the kind of income averages in the district. But a key point here, I think, is around fixed costs. You can have a low income and not being in poverty, but if you have high fixed costs as well as a low income, clearly there are going to be significant challenges. And I think probably the one that stands out, and this is a regional issue, not just for the district, but certainly prevalent here in particular, is that we are the only region, the Southwest is the only region with above average house prices, but below average wages. And that is a key challenge for people in terms of affordability and their quality of life going forward. Again, from a quick Google search, interestingly, this is a different scale, but the Department for International Development highlights that economic growth is the most powerful single instrument for reducing poverty on an international stage. But we also know that economic growth is not necessarily inclusive. Not all boats rise, essentially, in terms of everyone benefiting from that growth. It's not necessarily even sustainable, and concepts there around, carbon and the green economy as well. Important to mention social mobility, and obviously accessing a decent, well-paid job is key to how people can improve their life chances, life prospects, and being a fundamental determinant of wider quality of life and well-being as well. So that was just some kind of key points for me from, as I say, knowledge and some quick background research as well. But very much a link between economic performance and poverty, historically and well evidenced over time. So next slide, bringing that down to the district level. I think it's true to say that we have historically benefited from very low unemployment rates. Certainly 1.4% in September 2019 is akin to pretty much full employment in the sense that you will never get to zero, but that is very, very low. And it's historically been well below both the regional and the UK average, consistently for the last 15 years or so. I think, so for me, in a nutshell, we had a productivity challenge as opposed to an employment challenge. By that I mean the challenge was to increase access to higher paid employment across the board, and improve skills, address underemployment as part of that process. So that was the challenge. It wasn't about getting more people into employment. It was about increasing the value of those jobs, those wages that people were ultimately taking home. So that was the background. As I say, a long-term pattern there. Obviously, that was all pre-pandemic, and I'll come back to that point. I just wanted to show these slides, this slide. So this is some figures around GDP per head. I won't profess to be an economist at this point, but I take a very simple view. So gross domestic product is a measure of output of the economy and of value, ultimately. And if you can see here, Exeter, performs really strongly and has a GDP per head, double that of East Devon. East Devon is 1, 2, 3, 5th in the list. Certainly as you come down the list, and I'll come back to some of the reasons for this, you get towards Torridge, West Devon, the more seasonal economies, the more economies that are more fundamentally based on agriculture, the lower the output, and that has a direct bearing in relation to wages as well. You can see we performed quite strongly in terms of jobs growth, but our challenge, as I say, has been to increase the value of that employment relative to just not having, relative to getting up towards more of the kind of Exeter levels. And you can see North Devon, South Hams are further up the list as well. So it's not just our kind of city neighbour, so to speak. So as I say, I will circulate these slides, digest the information at your leisure, but there is a well-established trend over that 7-year period up to 2018 there as well. Earnings, why is it an issue in the district? Well, a couple of reasons highlighted here, or 2-3 reasons. We have a higher proportion of part-time workers, which is a challenge. We are also underrepresented in higher value professions, some highlighted there around digital telecoms, data processing, for example. But also, and I mentioned this previously in relation to the preceding slide, if you have an economy that is quite seasonal, it has a significant tourism sector, as we do, has a significant agricultural sector as well. And you can see that we have 6 times the national average of employment in that sector. That is a challenge because it fundamentally affects the wage structure of the district, and that is the concluding point there. Also to highlight, and this is a vulnerability in relation to what might happen in the next few weeks, risks around Brexit and automation. If you have lots of low paid, low skilled employment, those are the types of jobs that, for example, could be highly at risk to automation going forward as well. So it's the type of thing that really needs to be addressed structurally going forward. Okay, I mentioned some historic trends, established patterns, and one of those being near full employment. I just wanted to illustrate the change that's happened in the last 9 months. And so these are just some of the companies that have either gone into administration, are consulting on large-scale job losses, or have or are moving forward those currently, or have gone bust fundamentally. And you can see there's a wide range of different businesses there, organisations like the National Trust, across a different variety of scales. Some of them, not all of them in district. Oscar Mayer being in charge, being foremost within that in terms of currently consulting on closing that site, which employs, I think, over 800 people. And clearly for places like Axminster, clearly falls within the travel to work area of Oscar Mayer. But others, Flybe in the airport, over 1,000 jobs lost there, which is unprecedented. But it's across all aspects of the economy. Some, as I'll come back to, are more heavily impacted than others, like tourism, for example. So for me, taking stock of the current year is really significant. And what does it mean for the outlook going forward is a point I'll come back to. Oh, sorry, Chair, a couple of participants have raised hands. Shall I pause?
Well, would you like to carry on? And I'm just looking, how many people are there? I wonder if it would, what would you like to do, Andy? Would you like to take questions as you're going along, or would you rather wait until the end? Which do you prefer?
No, I'm very happy. I lose the thread otherwise. So very happy to pause and pick up on particular slides if that's the best way.
Yeah, okay. So shall we have questions then from, I'm not sure, Amanda, who was first in the list here for questions.
I think it's in the order that you can see it, Chair. So I think Councillor King perhaps was first, then Faithful, and then Councillor Hawke.
Thank you. Councillor King then first, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points, several points actually. We're talking about the presentation, which I think is really useful. Started with talking about the relationship between poverty, the levels of poverty and economic prosperity. I don't think there's a direct relationship, because economic prosperity depends upon the driving forces within it. At the moment, Mark Carney is giving the Wreath Lectures. We had the first one last week, and he underlines the point I wanted to make, which is the difference between economic value and social value. Without a doubt, in this country, the wealth gap has increased hugely over the last decade. And the cost of fuller employment has been the levels of pay for those employed at the lower end. Frequently, they are not paid enough to live easily. In fact, they cannot pay their way whilst being in work. Andy mentioned one of the problems was high fixed costs and low income. And I think he was referring to assets such as buildings or property. I would apply that to people. If you don't have enough money to live off because you are paid poorly, then you go into debt. A debt, because of the requirement for paying it back, is a high fixed cost. And if you have a low income and that debt simply increases, and then eventually you go bankrupt. You end up in a real mess trying to resolve that, sometimes illegally. It is a horrid affair. You lose your house and everything. So I think it's all very well to say we've got good employment, but the quality of employment is a very important factor. Another point about the GDP. In 1991-92, I remember coming down here looking for work in Devon, and there was about 15% unemployment. Between 1991 and 92, between that time and about 2006, there had been a remarkable growth in GDP, and people were very proud about it until the head economic officer at the Southwest Regional Development Agency pointed out that all that had happened was that the level of employment had improved. The intrinsic level of productivity had not changed. This highlights the fact that GDP has within its formula the levels of employment. So by having a greater levels of employment, or derived from having very cheap people pulled off the unemployment register, cheap waged jobs, getting people off the register, I think muddies the water when one starts to use GDP as a guiding factor. And for goodness sake, France has a fantastic GDP. Their formula is different from the one used in the UK. And if you make adjustments to gain parity, they aren't as good as they look. I think the final point I wanted to make was about economic value, social value, carbon value. All of these are coming into play. Indeed, Mark Carney, recently the governor of the Bank of England, he is now with the United Nations looking after the economy according to carbon ambitions, which I think is a wonderful appointment. And the good news is that already this council is looking at triple bottom line, and I know Andy is leading on that, I think. So that's good news. And I just wanted to add a couple of points about, it sounds like good news about employment levels. We need to look out for that and be more analytic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor King. Did you have any comments on that, Andy, or do you want to listen to other comments first and then reply if you feel you need to?
Thank you, Chair. I just come back very quickly. Some really good points there. I would, for me, unbridled economic growth does not necessarily deliver, social progress or, carbon benefits or environmental improvement. In fact, probably, on occasions quite the opposite. And I would highlight, in terms of what Councillor King has said, that the rise of the gig economy, if you are on a 0 hours contract currently, there are going to be issues for you, if you're, in that position, it is a, real concern, I think, for folk. I absolutely agree also, gross domestic product, is not, it's one indicator. It should not be taken as a totem for, the health of the economy more generally. I know certain countries have sought to move towards something that's more around gross domestic happiness, which is a much more rounded appreciation of how an economy should work for people's benefit. And as Councillor King has said, the triple bottom line concept, something growth that has absolutely benefits for people in terms of employment and wages, but also delivers environmental benefits and social progress as well, is where we need to get to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy. So we've got Councillor Faithful next. Thank you.
Yeah, of the GDP figures, is there anything that shows that the proportions of people working in Exeter but living in East Devon? That surely the figures you're getting are saying that the jobs are in Exeter, but it's the people aren't actually living in Exeter that have got the high paid jobs, because they live in rural places usually, don't they?
Andy, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, yes, very good point. So you do need to be careful about how statistics are measured, whether it's by by workplace or by place of residence, because clearly, we know there is if you like, a tidal relationship with Exeter. People flow in the morning and flow out at night, and we do have some of the higher skilled people who access jobs in places like some of the big legal firms, for example, that are bringing back very substantial wages back into the district. So I think this was by place of residence, but it just highlights, without any commuting, how different that relationship is. Clearly there are effects that muddy that relationship because of commuting, which we shouldn't ignore overall. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm going to add another statistic for what it's worth. In the UK, 20 years ago, the percentage of people in poverty who were working families was 39%. It is now said to be 56%, which means the majority of people who are in poverty are actually in work. And I just wondered whether Andy had any statistics of what percentage of people in poverty in East Devon are in work. And if he doesn't have it, I just wonder whether it's something he might be able to dig out for the future, because I think it's a really powerful statistic, and it informs us of knowing people's circumstances where they are in poverty. And I think it's a shocking statistic personally.
Andy, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, it's a very good point. Absolutely. I think we've definitely seen generationally, the fact that families have to have two jobs now, not just the one, and the rising quantum of people in work poverty is a very substantial issue. I shall see what I can dig out as a table or some stats that demonstrate that, and send it around with the slides.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you very much. We've got Councillor Rylance. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to remind everybody that a couple of years ago, the UN Special Rapporteur came and did a report on Great Britain and concluded that there were 14 million people living in poverty in this country, of which a significant proportion of families with children. And we're seeing that at the moment during this epidemic, this pandemic, that the worst affected demographic at the moment is families with young children. And this should be a national disgrace to us all. The fact that we cannot seem to create the environment, the structural environment to allow parents to bring up their children without huge stress and 70 or 80-hour working weeks. So in some ways, some of this is slightly above our pay grade, so to speak. And I think it's something we really should be pushing our elected representatives in Westminster to be changing, because during the Blair years, a lot of progress was made with decreasing the poverty of children, as Councillor Miller said not very long ago. But that seems to have slammed into fast reverse, especially at the moment. And having taken on board everything that Andy said about the local economy and the precarity of people's jobs and the high cost of housing, these are things that need addressing structurally, a lot of them. Although we can do everything we can to help at a local level, a lot of them need addressing nationally. And I wonder whether it's something we could be asking our elected representatives to look at more closely in Westminster. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rylands. Andy, did you want to come back for that one?
Not particularly, Chair. It's
No.
a very short point. Absolutely.
No, it's just a comment for members, I think, really, because we need to do more lobbying. That's what it sounds like to me. Thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask Andy, we did a survey, or East Devon did, in Exmouth on how much the average tourist spent in Exmouth. And we were quite shocked that in Exmouth, it was £16 a head. Now we're very much into the tourist industries and the hotels and the seasonal work, which is low paid, and the tourists. But if tourists aren't spending the money, should we be looking at other forms of it, bringing other forms of employment into the area and not concentrating solely on the tourists, which aren't spending the money in East Devon, unless it's changed? Andy, I hope will know this. Whereas in Torquay, I think it's about £26 a head or something. So why we put all the emphasis on tourists and keeping sort of low and seasonal jobs, which are affecting the community, I'm wondering if that is an area we should be addressing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. Andy, did you want to come back on that one?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, in my experience, there's some fairly simple rules of economic development. And one of them is, you know, it's a huge advantage to have strengths in many sectors, but not to be over reliant on any, if that makes sense. So you have a diversified economy that is able to perform well in many different areas and to go up the value chain, if I can put it that way, i.e. to get in more spend and other things. And that is a challenge, I think, for us. I don't have the precise survey results available, but definitely for our coastal towns, there is a challenge across the southwest and beyond, you know, to raise the value and to raise spend, and you know, regeneration projects like the Sideshore project will help to do that.
Thank you, Andy. I've got Councillor Arnott next. Thank you.
Hello, Chair. Thank you very much. Yeah, just very briefly picking up on Maddie's point there. I think with tourism, what perhaps might be the best way ahead, because we do need the jobs and we are going to have to build on it, is to look at the different sectors within tourism. And there is obviously the end that is bucket and spade, but there is the increasing end of people coming and doing glamping holidays, or holidays that are based around coming and learning to paint or whatever. And these can be quite big spending tourists coming into an area. So just to say, I think that does connect with poverty, because although it is unfortunate that the jobs are seasonal, if your offer is not just bucket and spade and beach, then what you find is that the season starts in late February and it can still be going all the way to Christmas if you play your cards right and you've got serious indoor activities as well. So I just thought I'd make that point. It's a, you know, it is a key and huge part of our sector. It does provide, certainly where we live, a vast amount of employment. The problem is, which I fully acknowledge, that the wages are not always great. So what I'd like to see us do is help them up the offer so that wages grow duly. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Arnott, for that. Very interesting. Councillor De Saram, please, next.
Oh, good morning. Good morning. Thank you. Thank you so much, Chair. Andy, that was a really magnificent presentation. I was particularly struck by your point about the need to have access to higher paid employment that you mentioned. And I think that's something that we as a poverty task group should be looking at potentially, along with the last slide where you showed all the businesses that had actually unfortunately had economic difficulties caused through various factors. So I think that that's something that we as a council, as the economy as a whole, needs to look at, how we get the higher paid employment, as well as making sure that we save our bread and butter industries that are located on that slide that you've quite helpfully put forward, Andy. So that was really what I want to say. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor de Saram. I just wondered, Andy, whether you wanted to comment on what Councillor Arnott said and also what Councillor de Saram has just said. And then I think perhaps we suggest we move on with your presentation, if that's all right. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, yes, thank you for that. The couple of points in response, I think. One is, yeah, the tourism industry is very diverse, and there are some really good initiatives out there. I would highlight East Devon Excellence, which is a private sector-led initiative that seeks to demonstrate all that is best, if you like, around quite a diverse set of tourist-based industries in the district, and is really powerful in terms of showcasing everything that's available, from things like accommodation to things like food and drink. So that's one element. The other one, I think, in Councillor de Saram, absolutely, there's an opportunity, I think, at the moment. If you look at the impact of one of the potentially positive impacts of the pandemic, has been people working from home, reconnecting with where they both live and now work. And places like Exmouth, I think, from my mind, really stand to benefit from that. The fact that you can access the beach and have and work from home. Some of the digital startup businesses, for example, for me, there's a real opportunity there that perhaps didn't exist because of established commuting patterns previously, but have been redressed or rebalanced potentially as part of the pandemic going forward. And it's something we need to think about. How do we sustain and improve that going forward?
Thank you, Andy. Thanks very much. Would you like to carry on now, if you can remember where you got to on the presentation? Thank you.
So yes, this was just a slide of all those businesses across the district, across various different sectors that have either unfortunately made staff redundant or are consulting on that currently. And I'd say, from my kind of living memory, I can't remember a scenario where we faced that scale, which is just on this slide, getting on for 2,000, maybe a few more jobs. It is very significant. And so I really wanted to just drill down and highlight, what 2020 has meant relative to some of those more historic trends. So the first within that is our relative position as a district relative to the county in England in terms of universal credit claimant counts. And again, you can see on the one hand, the top left, 4.4%, we're beneath both the county average and the English average. But I think as you come down, the kind of standout figure is how much that position has changed, a 530% increase since September 2018. And, that from a low base, admittedly, but obviously that scale of increase has to be a concern, comfortably outstripping particularly the England average, but also the county as well. And for me, then, when you start to lift the bonnet, so to speak, starting to understand the differential impacts of the pandemic is really critical, because it's by no means uniform across the district or by age group in this case. And you can see here the disproportionate impact on youth unemployment, the 16 to 24-year-old bracket as well. And again, in terms of how we look forward, the potential for a long-term worklessness, to use a term, for people not to be able to get a foot onto the kind of labour ladder going forward, onto the jobs market, is a really significant concern at the moment. I'll return to that point later on. The other parts, in relation to the district as well, are, whilst we've seen, undoubtedly a rise in unemployment, there's quite a lot of disguise at the moment, primarily because of the furlough scheme. And again, I think this has to be a significant cause for concern. In August, the ONS figures are showing 34% of the workforce in East Devon slightly above both the county and English average were on furlough, but nearly 20,000 people is hugely significant. And I'll come back to some of the modelling around, whether some of those jobs, ultimately will unfortunately be made redundant going forward. The other one as well, I mentioned previously about we have a significant proportion of self-employed, and you can see here the percentage of the workforce claiming self-employed income support, 6.2%, again above the county and the English average as well. But between those two, nearly 25,000 people alone. And I think this is a question that came up at Cabinet recently. What are the sectors that have been that are most reliant on those national support schemes, by implication that have been most impacted by the pandemic? And you can see those set out there, things like accommodation and food, really heavily using the furlough scheme, but also other areas in their retail, and this is pre the kind of Arcadia group, for example, arts and entertainment, but others like transport and storage as well coming in. So we need to be mindful again of the kind of specific sector-based impacts of the pandemic going forward. In terms of what that means for people, so this is again some county council analysis around vulnerability and about those groups that are expected to be hardest hit. Just to highlight a few in there, obviously I've just mentioned the furloughs and the self-employed, but not just the under 25s. I think a point that's been raised as well, the over 50s, if you are made redundant when you're over 50, it makes your chances of getting a similar job much more difficult fundamentally, and there is rising unemployment most undoubtedly in the over 50s as well. So it's not all about the kind of 16 to 24-year-olds. Workers in retail, the high street is facing a huge challenge. There is growth in other areas, which I'll come back to, but the high street in particular stands out at the moment. Proportion of workers in tourism, hospitality, and also a little bit in manufacturing as well. But that is highlights across the board, both by sector, by age group, where those particular impacts are being felt. And just to translate that into a bit more, this is again pan-Devon, but would apply for us as well, obviously. Lower paid workers. I think Councillor Allen sent round the Resolution Foundation reports. Lo and behold, it is those lower paid workers that are being disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And that is, a real source of concern. Again, freelancers, the just about managing families, which I think picks up on Councillor Miller's point about in-work poverty as well. And I'll see if I can get a fuller breakdown of the figures for this. But significant concern there, as well as younger people and the over 50s. You can see the rising unemployment, universal credit claimants in both of those age groups. And I'll come back to some district figures as well in that respect. Also mention people, sectors, place. So the County Council have a vulnerability index that looks across Devon, 457 different areas identified within that. And they put together a vulnerability index which measures various indicators from things like unemployment, particular concentrations of specific types of employment in terms of sector as well. And you can see here that it is kind of Axminster, Exmouth, Honiton that come out highly within the district, but also highly within a Devon setting as being vulnerable. And that is, again, an issue we need to be very mindful of, that there are specific geographical aspects to this in terms of how these trends may play out on the ground going forward. These are the latest unemployment stats. Again, I won't go through every figure, but I just wanted to highlight that whilst we talk about towns, that by ward, there are some wards here, and I would highlight at the bottom Wimple and Rockbere, for example, which again from a very low base, but between October 18 and October 2020, a 1,500% increase in claimant. counts. Also, I think Budley and Raleigh also come into that category as well. So it's not just about our towns. This is across the board. I think it came out in the analysis that Libby put forward recently. It was highlighting areas like Woodbury that potentially people wouldn't associate with experiencing some of these difficulties going forward. But this is, you know, significant across the board, and the finer grain analysis really starts to highlight some of this on a ward by ward basis as well. Again, this is helpful stats from the County Council, who have looked at potential projections. It's slightly difficult to model this at the moment, so there are some assumptions here. So what the County Council have done is looked district by district. They've run essentially two scenarios. One is that 15% of jobs that are either subject to furlough or the self-employed income support scheme become unemployed, and the other is a kind of slightly more optimistic, that's only 5%. Together with the seasonality factor, you can see North Devon has a high seasonality factor, but we're half of that indicator, but it's still significant in the district. And whilst we're not, seeing the highest projection in terms of universal credit increase, under the high we are getting pretty much towards 10% by March 21. And under the low, we're getting towards 7%. And bear in mind, March 20, as it says there in the first or second column, we were at 1.8%. So potentially a five-fold increase in universal credit claimants over that year-long period. This scenario model is complicated by the second lockdown period, and you can see here that the county have also done some scenario modelling about when the economy might return to some form of normality, and the impact of the second lockdown has definitely prolonged that period in relation to what happened in April. And that is again a concern that if there are further restrictions, I know people are feeling more optimistic currently, but if there are further restrictions, it will knock back and prolong the effects that we are seeing. And that was just some of the modelling that the County Council have done in that respect. The other thing to say is, around the kind of structure of the economy moving forward, we are seeing, we have the largest logistics site this side of Bristol in the district. We have another 1 million square feet of distribution space coming forward. And to quote the developer of that site, they have seen 5 years of demand or growth in 3 months. There is very significant trend or shift towards online retailing. And we do have a reasonably sized Amazon facility in the district, and you can see here that Amazon are on their way to becoming the world's biggest employer, which is a really interesting trend. It raises a real challenge for us, I think, in terms of understanding that trend, the impact on the high street in particular, which feels a structural shift that has been accelerated. But how do we also make the most of that? If you go to the Lidl distribution centre, the biggest building, I think, in Devon now, in Clisthoniton, they are paying the living wage rather than the minimum wage. And there are some opportunities there, but we need to be mindful about how people can access those jobs going forward. It has been a little bit tricky to agree an employment and skills plan with the developers of that site to make sure that we can have local training provision so people have the relevant skills to be able to access those jobs going forward. But that is, for me, a structural shift and kind of picks up, I think, a little bit on what Councillor King said in his first question. So also opportunities, it's not all gloom and doom, as I'll say at the end. There are opportunities for us in terms of thinking about recovery, to kind of reset, to work towards a more sustainable economy and focus on our business skills and environment in that respect. I mentioned in relation to Exmouth, but the opportunity, and I know our digital infrastructure needs improvement, but the opportunity for home working to redress, some of the commuting issues we've seen, to have more people reconnect with their local high street on a day-to-day basis, for example, I think is very significant going forward. And that is around those trends in flexible and remote working, for example, across the district. And also here, picking up on the point earlier, tourism industry went from, lockdown to, a significant summer in the sense that, a lot of people were holidaying in the UK, and there was a busy summer. But that, is something that a platform that can be built upon going forward. So I know that you're coming back to the action plan, Chair, but this all of the slides previously relate to pretty much objective 3. It permeates into other areas, but you will see within the action plan there are a range of actions designed to promote an inclusive economy that goes to the heart of things like skills and improving access to that wide range of employment opportunities that hopefully will come forward in the district. I won't go through all of those points now because I think it will probably be for the next agenda item, but things like digital skills provision, the role of our schools, are all critical in terms of creating that pathway for people to be able to access those jobs going forward. There are some specific initiatives in there like Kickstart, which are designed to offer placements for 16 to 24-year-olds to give them, if you like, a leg up onto the employment ladder just at the moment as well. So in conclusion, for me, an inclusive economy is a really important part of the delivery of the overall strategy. We have some established challenges of raising wage levels across the district, but as hopefully has been illustrated in the slides, now with the added challenge of responding to the impacts of the pandemic and how to wrestle with those impacts. Clearly, one of the fundamental things for me is when you lift the lid on those impacts, they are, they're not uniform. They are differential impacts across the district, certainly by people in terms of age groups, by income, with the lowest paid feeling the biggest impacts, by place and by sector as well. To quote the Chancellor recently, we're at the front end of this in many ways. The economic emergency has only just begun. But equally, I think there are some reasons to be optimistic going forward in terms of how we can sustain economic recovery and to think about how we address critically the qualitative, not just the quantitative, the qualitative aspects of employment in the district as well going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy. Very, very interesting. I'd just now like to ask non-members to speak. I know some have already spoken, but if they would like to come in, first of all, the non-members of the panel, by raising your electronic blue hand. And then once non-members have spoken, I'll invite members of the panel to speak. And I just wanted to confirm, as you did before, Andy, that this presentation will be sent on to everybody after the meeting, won't it? Yeah, thank you. So any non-members wish to speak, please? Thank you. I don't think we have it. Have we any? Oh, yeah. Councillor Hayward, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, I'd like to thank Andy for that presentation. I think it sums up very clearly the challenges we have ahead, and also the representation earlier from Councillor Chapman. Sometimes you just have to do the right thing. That carries a cost, but it's the right thing to do. And all of us elected are trying to do the right things for the residents. The officers are employees of the council. They're trying to do the right thing too. And we are in an unprecedented situation, and Andy summed that up very clearly. We all have a duty to do what we can, but essentially to protect the most vulnerable. And I'm delighted that you, Councillor Armstrong, Chair, are taking this forward, and to the likes of Councillor Allen and others who have been, vocal on this subject for a very long time, far longer than I've been an elected member of this authority. But it's very important. We can't forget those who struggle sometimes to help themselves and who feel a bit lost and adrift, that the world's forgotten them. Well, it's nice to know that East Devon hasn't forgotten them, and we never will. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hayward. Could I ask Councillor Howe now, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's an interesting set of scenarios, isn't it? And I suppose I've got to declare I own a shop. I'm in retail, so food retail. So we've been positively affected by the COVID situation, if you get my meaning, in one way or another, if that can be the best way put, as most. It's the structural shift from the likes of Debenhams and Dingles, etc., House of Fraser Group, to local towns. And we need to make sure our local towns prosper. They're going to prosper. They've got to prosper more. And I suppose it's an open question to Andy, because we don't actually own much of these local towns. Many landlords do, and that's part of the issue, is the rents. These small shops that thrive in our local communities and are growing in these scenarios, even though they've got to get out through the next 3 to 6 months. How we can support them, and how we can encourage rents in particular to stabilise, so these businesses can keep trading, because they are our local town street futures. And it's just, are we ready? Are we able? If one of the larger property developers that does own bits of town, shall we say, goes bust for whatever reason, are we able to purchase these bits and make a business out of it in a short order to keep these town centres thriving? Because we've got to keep it going for many reasons. So it's a bit of a long question. Sorry, Andy, to throw you in at the deep end on that one, but it's just, we've got to be ready now for the next 3 months, because I'm confident the next 3 months as well. Actually, end of January, everyone goes bust. Typically, if that's when they're going to go bust. So we need to be ready and able to pick up the pieces. And so we've got something for summer, which we are going to have a great summer. We know we're going to have a great summer. Tourism's going to be backed, but we've got to be ready for it. And we've got to have the businesses in our towns to trade from it as well.
Thank you very much, Councillor Howe. Andy, would you like to respond on that, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, that's it's a really significant challenge, and I think there's probably a number of different kind of levels to this. Some of the things are kind of structural. Landlord rents, the business rate regime are probably held up on a national stage as things that need reform. And then it comes down to the local level. There are initiatives at the moment. Just thinking about how we just launched a campaign last week to help buy local. On the local high street, in the run up to Christmas, for example, there's things that we can actively be doing. But I think I get the point that fundamentally there may come a time in terms of repurposing of the high street. And I saw something from Mary Portas earlier today. It's not about saving the high street; it's about repurposing the high street. Which is a fundamental change. That there may be instances where, if you like, direct intervention is required in order to regenerate and repurpose. I've heard about regreening, rewilding, if you like, the high street. But Cranbrook High Street is probably an example of this for a development that doesn't currently exist, where there's probably a rationale for intervening because the market wouldn't ordinarily deliver something that seemingly is needed by all our residents, and that's something we need to think very carefully about across all our towns, about what intervention is required. Also, one of the things that lingers in my mind is I think Ian Stiles spoke at the last overview committee and highlighted that he is a willing private sector investor. Trinity House has just been acquired, and there are some really good examples, I think, where the private sector is investing that could be nurtured as well. So hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you, Andy. Thanks very much. Councillor Jarvis, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm fortunate enough that I work on the high street too, and I work for a charity. 14 of our shops are actually in East Devon out of our 19. Each week I get to see the statistics. We went into furlough, obviously, and we went back into furlough. But coming back after the initial furlough period where we were shut, I get to see each week what the shops were doing, what they used to do in previous years. Some of our strongest shops are now in disaster, like Honiton, and some of our smaller shops that didn't do very well are now doing extremely well. I was just wondering if there's any way that we can tap into not only the organization I work for, but also other businesses that have locations across our district to try to get statistics. It's easy enough to see where the employment figures are, but just to get the financial implications of what's going on, being able to tap into their information and bring it into us to be able to see where our hotspots are likely to be for the retail world and the tourism world, the areas we're going to need to focus on a little bit more, and also maybe looking at some of the other areas that are suddenly doing better business to find out what exactly is going on within those communities. Hopefully that was clear.
Thank you, Councillor Jarvis. Very good. Andy, yes, some good points there. Could you respond to those, please? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. One of the funding sources that have been made available to us is the Reopening High Streets Safely Fund, which Tim Child's team is leading on. I would just highlight they are looking or in the process of procuring some further information around footfall, which I know doesn't give the complete answer around trade, but is nonetheless a proxy for kind of local spend on the high street. So there is further insight, further evidence coming that I would hope would help to shape and inform our own plans and activities going forward as well. So that there is a body of work there in relation to that specific funding stream as well.
Thank you, Andy. Is that all right, Councillor Jarvis? No?
The strange thing about footfall is footfall doesn't actually mean basket totals. What I've been noticing is that the footfall has gone down, but the purchasing has gone up. It's a very different situation. Maybe that's because of the restrictions on how many people can come into shops, etc. A lot of people are impatient, don't really want to go into shops that are what they wouldn't call as their old-fashioned, just having a shopping day. It's so it would be interesting to try to get some financial information to go along with that footfall. But thank you. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Jarvis. Does anyone else wish to speak from outside of the panel, please? If not, shall we go inside the panel now? Thank you. To Councillor Miller.
Yeah, thank you. Just to point out, first of all, that Councillor Jarvis is on the panel for any avoidance of doubt, I think.
I'm really sorry.
Just so you know,
really
Chair.
Sorry about that. I'm in a dream world.
I saw him. I saw his face there.
Thank you.
I just firstly wanted to thank Andy Wood for what I think is by far the best presentation I've received as a district councillor from the council. It was extremely informative, and I've learned a great deal. And the statistics in my ward, in particular, very helpful for me. I was particularly struck by Andy's comment about an analysis about the furlough scheme. It's very close to home. My sister was told that she would no longer have a job when the furlough scheme ends. So we're approaching a cliff edge. Councillor Howe made the point about rents. Of course, it's not something I think the district can control. And if we can get some national legislation to ensure that landlords aren't increasing rents to make business unviable, I think that would be very welcome. And I do agree that high streets need to be repurposed. I mean, in many ways, this pandemic has presented opportunities as well as challenges. And I speak for myself. There are jobs that weren't available for me living in East Devon that are now available to me. And tomorrow I start a new job working for a charity on a London wage, working remotely. And it's now a long-term remote job. It never used to be. a huge opportunity for me to live and work in Exmouth and travel when needed. And I hope that's the future of the economy, because, you know, I'm on a high wage now, and, you know, I hope that opportunity is available for other people. I had one final question to Andy. It goes back to what I was saying earlier about the number of people who are in work who are in poverty. One thing I researched when I was in Parliament was the link between zero-hour contracts and in-work poverty, and the correlation is extremely high. My brother used to be on a zero-hour contract. I remember just how difficult it was for him. He was working in Exmouth at the time. I just wanted to ask Andy, does East Devon District Council have zero-hour contracts? Because obviously if they do, I'd quite like to propose that we get rid of them, in the sense that I think that East Devon District Council could set a really good example to local business, because I can't see any positives from zero-hour contracts. All they create is uncertainty for people and anxiety about when the next paycheck's going to come. So I just want to ask that question to see where we stand on zero-hour contracts. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Andy, have you got any comment on the zero-hours contract? Thank you.
I'd have to take that away to make sure I give you an accurate answer, Chair, if I can come back to you on that.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. Now then, who's next? Sorry about this. I have to apologise to Councillor Jarvis. I don't know what planet I was on then. I think it's because it's the first meeting he's been to. Apologies, Councillor Jarvis. Now, Councillor de Sarum, please, next. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think, as everyone has said, Andy, that's a tremendous, good, informative presentation. I think picking up what Councillor Howell touched on about making local towns prosper. When we were at Overview the other week, we spoke about the use of digital technology in the high street, because I think that the concept of Argos, as many members know, where you came in and didn't, you put your things down on a piece of paper and got things from the thing. I think the concept of Argos is what we need in the high streets, to combine that with a digital presence, so that people actually can get to the high street, can take their shopping if they can't get it. They know how to get it by going back online. And I think it's on para 3.2 of our strategy, where it says suggest something around digital inclusion here. And I think it's very important that we as a committee look to make sure that most of our members, I know we've got issues here about broadband and all the rest of it, but I think it's an important strategy that we encourage both our high streets to be able to do that, because that way, if the high streets have this digital technology, that if you want something and they don't necessarily have it, they could, compete with Amazon by saying, if you click here, we can click and order it for you and bring it to you the next day. So it's that sense of digital inclusion, and also it's encouraging people to go away and use digital technology, because otherwise some people say, well, I haven't got it at home because of poor broadband. So I think, Chair, if that's something, we probably might pick that up in point 6 next, but I think it's digital inclusion is very important, and I welcome Andy's thoughts on that.
Thank you, Councillor de Sarum. Andy, do you have a comment to make on that, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So 2 quick points. One is, I think there's some really good innovation going on where essentially whole high streets are going online. You can do all your shopping in the same shops in one place, but with the willingness of all the kind of retailers participating in that. So there are some really good examples of where people are innovating, adapting to those circumstances, and taking full advantage, quite frankly, as well, which is the way it should be. The other point, absolutely, there's no point having amazing digital infrastructure if people don't have the skills or the ability to kind of access or make that work for themselves. So there are things, business support programs. I know that digital boot camps that people like the Local Enterprise Partnership are looking to bring forward, that are designed, and I should also mention Cosmic, who are obviously headquartered in the district and play a huge role in terms of digital inclusion, making sure people have those skills to be able to access things digitally. And that is a big opportunity, I think, for the district going forward. So I would agree with Councillor de Sarum.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Allen, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Andy, I think that what you've presented is really good analysis. My particular concern is to look at what could be done about it. And one of the things that I've continually been concerned about is to look at the whole issue of improving skills and employment. And I know we have significant grants going through from the government through your team. And I know that a number of other poverty strategies have taken on board the emphasis on linking the grant applications and the interaction with businesses to making sure that there is a positive message going out on skills and the need for the living wage to be the minimum. And I wonder if during our activity interacting with businesses, there isn't a role for a positive enforcement, even a conditionality where appropriate, to make sure that first of all, employees are being looked after with a living wage as a minimum. Secondly, that they should be encouraged to have a career and a pathway of improving their skills rather than just being employed. And thirdly, whether or not using Kickstart and various other apprenticeship activities, we can't encourage people to take on work placements and so on, even if they don't stay in the company. The experience is very motivating and developing of skills. So I just wanted to mention some of the ways in which other councils have been looking at implementing action on some of these areas. The second and last point I want to make is about backing winners. We solidly backed companies like Jurassic Fibre and a £200 million investment into East Devon, and they've just bought a major piece of property, industrial property in Honiton. Now, those are the kind of companies, the future companies that we need to encourage. And at the same time, I'm very aware of what Paul Miller illustrated about people needing to be given a career guidance with regard to remote working as well, and higher wages that can come from that. So it's trying to untangle what we can do as a council from what we can do in partnership with other agencies. And what I don't really, at this stage, see any clarity in some of the forward plans that we've got. And I want to make sure that we can get going fast, because come next April, when all the schemes end and all of the winter damage has been done to cash flow, we are going to find massive, massive problems in terms of employment suddenly hit all together at the same time. And I want to be prepared to do our very best at that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. Andy, would you like to respond to any of those points, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, so I think on the first one, I think there's a variety of roles we can play, from raising awareness of things like the Kickstart programme. There's also a relevance to our decision making around things like major planning applications, where we can, if you like, insist on employment and skills plans to help nurture local people into those jobs. There are other wider levers, I think, as Councillor Allen has mentioned, in relation to potential funding streams as well, that we all need to work through, and how that would help to achieve those wider kind of social benefits as well. So I'll come back to this in the second point about backing winners. There is a paper coming to, I think, the February Cabinet that will set out a framework for how we can support recovery, that will hopefully pick up on all of these points and you know, set them out more strategically. It is an interesting landscape at the moment. There is a big shift in terms of funding streams, new funding streams, levelling up funding, shared prosperity fund, that are all due to start at the turn of the year. and we need to be well positioned to make sure we can make the most of those for the benefit of local residents as well. So that further paper will be coming to Cabinet.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Allen, did you want to come back on any of that, or are you happy for now?
No, I think we can come back on it when we look at action planning in more detail. But I just want to say that I really support what Andy's team's doing. We just need to make sure that they get the solid backing, and that's why I was delighted that Andy, you got a sanction to hire 2 more people in your team. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. Councillor Rickson, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to come back to the issue of unfair business rates. This has been a scandal for some years now, and it's high time that the government was lobbied hard to make sure that they do something about it. Bricks and mortar businesses are paying a disproportionate amount compared with online. There's an article which I've just pulled up from The Guardian, which was last year, and it says business rates for Amazon amount to less than 1% of sales compared to 2.5% for Next, 1.8% for Marks and Spencer, nearly 3.5% for Debenhams, and guess which group has gone bust, although of course Sir Philip Greedy has obviously pulled out far too much money, but that's a different ballgame. But apparently it said here that Amazon confirmed it pays UK business rates of only 63.4 million, almost 40 million less than Next, despite clocking up more than double the sales in the UK. This is a scandal which must be addressed.
Thank you, Councillor Rickson. Andy, do you have any comment on that, bearing in mind that it's generally a government scenario?
Yeah, it's yes. The challenge of business rates relative to things like digital sales taxes, I think it needs obviously to play out at a probably national, if not international level. I would just say though that we do benefit the Amazon facility at Kingstonton. You know, we do benefit. I think their business rates there are £600,000 a year, and there is a significant uplift to us, which is pretty fundamental to the local government business model going forward, and indeed there's further distribution space coming forward. So we do have perhaps a unique opportunity to take, you know, from one hand and give with the other almost, in terms of where we're seeing business rate growth in the district and what we can then do to support the high street elsewhere.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Thanks. Councillor Hayward, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry to coming back into the member part of the forum. I think I was just at the cusp end of getting my hand up when someone mentioned another point that I thought was pertinent. Just coming back to Councillor Allen's point, he's absolutely right. We have to be prepared. We have to be ready to spring into action. The report yesterday from the Cabinet Office about the impact of the most reasonable outcome of Brexit in 24 days was damning, and it's going to be a very, very hard time for everyone. But the report was unequivocally clear when it said that it's going to disproportionately affect the poorest and the most vulnerable in our community. So I take Councillor Allen's point entirely, but of course we as a district council are swimming against the tide of government policy. Every time we come up with a plan, it only takes a stroke of a minister's pen to undo months, weeks, even years of work by our officers and members, and we find ourselves back at square one again. So that's the challenge we face. We will rise to the challenge, but I think no one should underestimate the severity and the scale of what we are trying to attempt to do. But Chair, if I may, the thing that popped in my head earlier, and I'm not sure if you're going to discuss it later on, if you are, my apologies, is the correlation between poverty and the matter of financial security and financial services. I worked in financial services for 8 years in mainstream financial services, and then through circumstances found myself later in my career dealing with a different sort of financial services on the doorstep and dealing with the consequence with that through debt collection and bailiffing as well. But it was a report recently that whilst payday lending and doorstep lending has been legislated and governed to some degree, there is now a new sinister menace coming back into thing, that of buy now, pay later, and the issue of layaways. And I think this is something that needs to have a close eye on. Obviously, Devon County Council usually are our source of protection through trading standards, etc. But I know that they have budgetary pressures and they have resourcing issues. So I think we just need to be aware. We've done great work previously with, the loan shark issues, and I'd like to applaud Councillor Hall on that, who has been at the forefront of that campaign. Certainly in the Axminster, Axe Valley area. But I received only the other day an email from PayPal saying, do you want to take on a virtual credit card, a buy now, pay later, which seemed on balance a great way. It's targeted at Christmas. So if I'm getting them, then a great many other people are going to get them over the Christmas period. But the problem is, like all things on the Never Never, you have to pay it back. And if we are going to face financial issues and hardship next year, as Councillor Allen alluded to, come April, then when the time comes to pay later, a great many people won't be able to. And I think this is something that we do need to, we can't do anything as a district council other than, as you say, Chair, lobby. But we do need to be aware of it and make sure that residents who are already trapped in cycle and trapped in poverty and trapped in financial vulnerability aren't trapped even further by these new financial products, because we all know financial services companies, each time that one door is closed, they create another. We don't have to go back to Bernie Madoff and that era to see that they are hungry for profit, and they will find profit wherever they can. And if it means exploiting the vulnerable, means nothing to them. It simply is another market to be tapped. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hayward. And yes, I quite agree with all of that. And I know that Libby certainly in revenues and benefits is very, very much aware of it, because it's all about indebtedness and trying to ensure that people aren't caught in that trap of loan sharks and all this new scheme that you've talked about, which I'd not heard of myself, actually, the buy now, pay later scheme. So I know it's something that's very, very close to her heart and to mine, and I'm sure to a lot of us. And as far as I can remember, it is in the action plan or something alluding to it. So yes, we'll keep a very close eye on that. Thank you. I don't know whether Andy wanted to comment on anything there, but I'd like us to move on if we can. I don't think I've got any other speakers, but if Andy, have you got a final word on either on that or anything else before we move on?
Thank you, Chair. Nothing particular other than to say, obviously, debt is a huge issue. I haven't touched on that in any detail, and I'm acutely aware of the work that, as you mentioned, Libby does around hardship and that team. That is all kind of related in one way or other, in terms of people's wages, their income, etc., going forward. So there's such an interweaving, if you like, of different issues here. They are all interconnected, which I think is where the action plan picks it all up in hopefully a holistic way.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, thanks ever so much for that, Andy. It's been really, really useful. I think people have learnt a lot from you this morning, and it's only the start, isn't it? We've still got to actually do something about. I know you're already doing things, but there are other things that hopefully we can look into in future. And we're going to be moving on to the action plan now, but and I'd like John to talk to us about that in a minute. But if you're going to be staying with us, Andy, for the time being, are you? Because we'll be looking at particularly the your section in the action plan, I think, whilst you're with us. And some of the things we may have already covered, but if there are other things that people want to pick up on, then we will do whilst you're here. Okay, thank you very much once again for that. Very, very useful. And this, as just to explain to panel members, that this is just the first of 4 similar presentations that we'll have. So in future, we'll be having housing, will be having finance and environmental health to speak to us in similar terms about their particular area of work and how it fits in with the strategy and the action plan. So if we can move on, because I was hoping we could try and finish at 1 o'clock, but we'll see how we go. I don't want to be much after 1 o'clock, really. Item 6, Draft Poverty Strategy Action Plan. John Golding, Strategic Lead, Housing, Health and Environment. So all members have been sent a copy of the Draft Poverty Strategy Action Plan. And I'll now invite John to introduce it to us, and especially the section on the economy. If I can hand over to you then, John, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So to drive this agenda forward, I've produced what is very much a draft action plan at this stage, but it builds on those 5 high-level objectives that we agreed at the last panel meeting. So just to recap on those, it covers household income, welfare benefits, financial resilience and indebtedness that we were just talking about. It also covers things like community support and working with community and voluntary groups to support families and individuals that are facing poverty. It then builds on the area that Andy was just talking about, so promoting an inclusive economy with access to good, well-paid jobs and the skills agenda. And then fourthly, it covers affordable housing and good housing conditions, touches on what the speaker earlier was talking about in terms of what I've referred to as furniture poverty. And then finally, it looks at improving health outcomes and the whole area around health equality and well-being. So the 5 objectives, they do fit quite neatly against different service areas, with some of the service leads assuming a kind of lead role on progressing these areas with me. But it also tries to recognise that poverty is very much a cross-cutting issue, so it cuts across all sorts of council services. The format I've tried to develop is it shows an action, a numbered action with a lead service, timescale, and then a comments column. As you can see, it's not a finished product. There are still some notes draft notes in the action plan, but I see it as a document that sits alongside the strategy document that will provide the narrative in due course when we get to that stage. So it sets out what we intend to do over the next few years if we agree the content of that. It does need to be dynamic and flex with the changing circumstances and issues. Again, we've talked about those, and particularly pertinent at the moment is how the pandemic and probably Brexit will affect the poverty agenda. So it needs to be able to flex to reflect those issues. It needs to be ambitious but realistic and populated with things that we can achieve as a district council. And you'll recall, I think at the first meeting, we looked at that sphere of influence and what we can realistically do against poverty, because there are bigger factors at play, not least of which is national policy issues. We are implementing many of the poverty actions already. I think it needs to be said, and have been doing so for some time. What we're trying to do here is to pull together in a strategy and an action plan those areas that we're currently doing, those where we can be more ambitious and enhance what we're doing and develop some new initiatives just to make our kind of anti-poverty work more effective. I haven't produced a PowerPoint presentation. The document is it's quite a few pages long, but happy to go through and pick up any points. And I suggest we probably need to revisit the draft as it develops at future meetings of the panel. And then when you're ready, I can bring some narrative so that a kind of a narrative, picking up on a lot of that data that Andy's presented and that others hold, pull that together in a strategy document of which the action plan will sit as an annex. So that's the thinking, Chair. Happy for that to be tested and challenged by the panel. Thank you.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. Thank you, John. I just wonder whether it's worth just looking at specifically the objective 3 about the inclusive economy, and whether either yourself or Andy and then members would like to comment on any of those things that are in there at the moment. That's what I was thinking of doing for the future meetings, so that for each head of service that come along to speak to us, we can look at those particular areas and just for them to outline, just in case there are any updates or anything that they want to say about them. So would you like to speak on that, or shall I pass it over to Andy, or what do you think? What's the best way forward on that?
So Andy and in fact his team have helped populate this section of the report. They've been working with me on this, which I've been extremely grateful for, because it's a specialist area, not my specialist area. So between Andy and myself, I'm sure we can try and address any questions that the panels have.
Okay, so shall we just go to questions, particularly at the moment then on the sorry, I'm losing my pages here. On objective 3, promoting an inclusive economy by raising skills and improving access to a range of employment opportunities for people on low incomes. I know we've just been talking about that, but I just wonder if members, well, external members and members of the panel have any thoughts about any of those proposals that are on there, and any questions really. So there are quite a few proposals down there. So could I just ask people from outside of the panel first of all, if anybody has any questions on any of those, or do you feel as if we've talked about economy enough today? It doesn't look as if there's anybody from outside the panel at the moment. So shall I take Councillor Miller first of all? Have you got any comments on the economy section?
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, I thought we were going to be discussing the entire document, so I would like to come back to that once we've discussed this aspect.
Yes, we will.
But whilst we are on that aspect, the only thing that is slightly relevant, it's not in section 3, but it's about the economy. It's in the first section, which is about promoting the real living wage. My comments earlier about the 0-hour contracts, I wondered whether it was something Andy could go away and look at and see whether it's something we can encourage our partners, such as LED and others, to, if they are using 0-hour contracts, encouraging them if they can to not use them for the reasons I identified earlier. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Miller. Is that, I think if you've taken that on board already, Andy, is that something that you were going to look into anyway?
Yes, Chair, I can look into that definitely.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, okay. Councillor De Sara?
Oh, yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think on 3.2, as we touched on earlier, we need to include something about digital inclusion. Digital inclusion, broadband connectivity, something on those lines, because clearly that will be playing quite an important role in both accessing your benefits through the use of the internet and also shopping in the high street. So I think digital inclusion is a key thing to look into, and I welcome your thoughts on it as well, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'm all for that. Yeah, that's fine. And any comments from either Andy or John on that, or shall we just move on?
Yeah, Chair, it is mentioned in the highlighted.
It is mentioned. Yeah.
So yeah, we need to find a form of words that builds it into one of those 9 or more actions under that section. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Right. Councillor Hawkins, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This might be something that comes in further down the process, but looking at the performance measures and outcomes, they're not smart targets at the moment. It's difficult, I think, to know when we've achieved or not achieved. So it'd be good if maybe further down the line we can look to making them smart and maybe come out with like a balanced scorecard on this, so we can actually see how we're progressing when something's implemented.
Yes, yeah, I agree. Yeah, good point. Any comments on the smart targets from John or Andy?
Yeah, they absolutely need to be smart, and as we finalise, we need to make sure that we smarten up all the objectives and have some form of, I like dashboards personally, or something similar, so the council can see how we're doing against the ambitions that we've set out in the strategy.
Yeah.
Make a note.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much for that. Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. Councillor Rickson, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. There's been mention about digital inclusion. I think we'd better highlight yet again that we need to have better provision across East Devon with regard to broadband access and mobile access, because this is not universally available and rural areas are significantly disadvantaged.
Yes. Is that taken on board, John and Andy? I think it's an underlying thing that's been going on for a long time, this, hasn't it? With no resolution as yet, as I understand. Do either of you want to say anything on that? Or is it something that needs to be added, or is it just assumed?
We can certainly add something in, Chair. As you say, it's an established issue. There are programmes coming forward, but we need to think what we can do to kind of really maximise the impact of those.
Yeah, lovely.
Can I just add, this is not just a question about employment. I think this also impacts on school children who have had problems with schooling because of perhaps being, because of COVID and having to be sent home. So it might have caused problems to some school children as well.
Yeah, good point. Yes, thank you. Yeah. Okay, right. Shall we add that onto the action plan somewhere, just to make sure it's not forgotten?
Yeah, we'll make sure it's included, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor King, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. That last point leads me nicely into what I wanted to talk about, which is there's a big difference between actions that can be achieved and aspirations. And I'm very concerned about the council having its attention and its efforts diluted, its resources diluted by chasing matters where we cannot actually get results. Broadband is such an issue. It is not within our gift to do anything about it other than ask others to get on with it. So I think that's a very valid action point, to ask others to get on with it and to petition them. But my belief is that if we can be really focused on what is the highly defined scope of what this council is empowered to do, and to concentrate on that first and foremost, we will be much more effective. I think that has to go in parallel with a communication that is what we do, both the definition of the scope and the action plan in relation to it. If I can just say about broadband, it is, Councillor Rickson's absolutely right. It is appalling what's going on and the lack of it. I was on a government think tank a while ago, a long time ago, to establish the economic and social value of broadband. This was in the noughties, and there were 5 of us on that think tank, and we advised the DTI after our findings. I was the only non-professor of economics on that panel. And what I am ashamed to say is that panel disregarded, that think tank disregarded the social economic value. It just used utility theory of economics, which was insufficient. It didn't look at the the opportunity cost, another economic term, the opportunity cost of broadband, whereas in rural areas, you don't have any other alternative if you are stuck at home with no transport, insufficient transport, unemployed. There isn't an alternative to a solution like broadband. Whereas if you're in a town, you've got passing trade, you can get out of your front door, go and ask people for work. You can't do that if you're isolated in the country. So we need to get that message across, which brings me back to my point. The strategy action plan, I think, must underline our scope much more precisely, or there must be a reference to it, and it must be precisely defined. In association with that, we must also know and have it declared as to who else, other agencies, authorities, or whatever, what else is being done elsewhere in the areas of our target areas of action, because duplication of effort is fairly pointless. Lack of communication is reprehensible. We must be coordinated, and that does cost more overheads on our officers' time. But I would consider that an investment to have greater effectiveness, again, greater effectiveness. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really good points there. Thank you, Fabian. I certainly agree. Yes, we have to just concentrate, I think, particularly on what the council can do. I entirely agree with that. Bearing in mind that we have to just lobby and do whatever we can as well for external organisations, mainly the government. So thank you for that. Councillor Allen, please.
Thank you, Chair. One of the promises you made to me is that you would incorporate some of the ideas that I put forward in August 2019 into the suggestions being worked on. I propose that I send them again to John because, for example, I proposed action with Devon County Council and the Skills Agency over the whole issue of career advice, which is critical for the future of our young people and for our 50+ people. The proposal to get economic development to counter stereotypes, to stop the older employees, 50+ employees, being discriminated against, not only in employment, but in recruitment. To work with the voluntary sector, which is a whole economic area that hasn't really been seen as an economic opportunity, but is now in dire trouble. And as Paul Miller mentioned, has got a lot of potential to employ people in our area. And in terms of raising funds, not only for voluntary sector, but also for businesses, there's a whole missing area in terms of finance for small organizations. There's specific economic development action to do with volunteer groups, which could be of significant benefit to people. We haven't done anything to actually map the volunteer groups that actually could help us reduce poverty. Certainly not to present those volunteer groups in a meaningful way to this committee, this panel. With regard to broadband, one of the things that we have done is obviously with emphasising Jurassic Fibre earlier on, we have encouraged that. But one thing we could do perfectly well within our resources is provide some laptops. Devon County Council received 2,500 laptops. It could be that all of them have been used up. I don't know how many came to our local schools, and I don't think that we should stop there. I think there should be some kind of resource for a family that is in deprivation to see whether or not we can help, because the laptop for the school children is one thing, but for the ability to access all of the help, people really need laptop access or mobile phone access. And if they don't have it, particularly the older population that don't use these things, we've got problems. So that's just a few of the things that originally were put forward last August 2019. But one of the most important things is helping people get affordable finance. And as has been mentioned by Paul Hayward, it's absolutely detrimental to get deeper into debt. So how can we help people find mechanisms for affordable finance, which is something I recommended back nearly over a year ago. A range of projects do need to be put into effect fast. If we wait much longer, then this whole situation of deprivation, as opposed to relative poverty, real deprivation is going to increase. And my concern is there's a very complicated range of actions proposed here, but we can't afford to spend months and months and months mulling them over. I want to see, please, proposals coming out of Cabinet to put a lot of these obviously good things into effect fast, and especially to impact on the forward financial plan, because we haven't really done anything in the forward financial plan to reflect some of these proposals. So I'm off to lunch now, Chair, and thank you very much for holding a very interesting meeting, but it has run on a bit, and I'm afraid I have to leave. So thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Allen. We usually have 2-hourly meetings, so it's only just 1 o'clock now. But if you have to go, you have to go. But I do have to say that report was taken into account. John did have a copy of it, and has presumably looked at that. A lot of the things that you mentioned are already happening. The affordable finance, for example, that is something that, as I said earlier, is very close to Libby Jarrett's heart. And I've had long conversations with her about how that can be affected and help people. And it's all part of the poverty strategy and the action plan. Now, I was given a job from the Cabinet to chair this poverty panel. And that's what I'm doing. And so far, members of this panel have not had any objections to the way we're going, the way that we're planning things. And I would hope that you just bear with it for another 2 or 3 months until we've got through the process. For example, at the next meeting, I'll tell you now if you're going to be leaving, at the next meeting, we're having a speaker from the DWP, as well as other issues that we'll be discussing, but that will be the main item. And it's really important that we take into account these external organisations and Citizens Advice and any other organisations to ensure that what we're putting in our strategy and our action plans are consistent with the kind of work that they're doing, because otherwise, what is the point? You know, we have to actually listen and understand what the current situation is, especially with COVID, especially with Brexit. And I would just hope that you'd bear that in mind, because if you don't know me by now, you should know me, that when I am set a task, I do it, and I try to do it to the best of my ability. And so far, we've worked very well together, and I'm hoping that we will continue to do so. But I will not be distracted by other issues that come up and trying to push this thing along faster than it should be. I will not be distracted from that. So I'm telling you that now as chair, whether you like it or not. Thank you.
Frankly, Chair, that is a very critical response to what I have put forward, and a number of my councillor colleagues have put forward as very positive proposals, but I can't say that we can drag our feet. It's an emergency at present, and it's going to get worse. And if we continue to just talk, it will do no good at all. So thank you for listening. I'm leaving.
Thank you. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you very much.
Thank
you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, John, for the excellent action plan. I think one thing that I don't know whether we can include is a qualitative evaluation of the actions. So we're doing some of the actions already. We don't want to get distracted by things that aren't in our sphere of influence, but can we pin down some of those actions as being the most effective, the most urgent, the most important, some way? Because at the moment there's no ranking or and I'm just wondering whether that might be something that could be included with a kind of traffic light system or a priority system. Obviously the things that we're doing already is great, but I'm just wondering if that's something that could be contemplated. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. John, would you like to respond to that, please?
Yeah, of course we can do that. And I think that's why we got those 5 high-level objectives in there. That those, I would suggest, are the priorities, but a whole series of things can hang below those as specific actions. And just picking up on some of the points that Councillor Allen has made, although he might have left the meeting now, he did submit a really good report, and I'd hoped I'd captured a lot of the spirit of what was in that report in these actions. Having regard to what Councillor King was saying is that what I have tried to capture is things that we can deliver ourselves or lobby on or through partners. And so whilst everything might not be there, for example, you mentioned careers advice, well, perhaps I've not included that because my view is that that is something that Devon County Council provide in the main. And there are also other sections that was referred to. So it was referenced no reference to voluntary groups. Well, that's in under objective 2, which, as you say, Chair, we're going to come to another meeting. And similarly, financial resilience and indebtedness is under objective 1. So I would hope that we got fairly comprehensive coverage here. And I did preface what I was saying in introducing this item in so much as we're not waiting for this to be approved before we start to take action. We're already, and have been for many years, very involved in delivering a whole range of anti-poverty measures. As you've heard through Cabinet recently, hardship schemes, the community support hub that's very active, all the grant schemes that Andy and his team have been delivering. So we're not waiting for approval of the strategy before we start delivering on things. We recognise the urgency and have been delivering many of these things for a considerable period of time.
Yeah, thank you, John. Yeah, quite agree. Councillor Rickson.
Thank you, Chair. I've got just 2 points to make. I think it was Fabian who mentioned about best practice, and I wonder whether there were perhaps any opportunities here for us to save reinventing the wheel, whether there are any lessons we could learn from other councils which could short circuit finding and implementing solutions. Also, I know that later this week there's a poverty motion which has been raised, but looking at the document and the comments that have been raised today, I think the points have already been covered or are being covered by the action plan.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Rickson. I've been looking at that as well, and I quite agree. Yeah, I think all, if most, if not all of the issues that are raised in this motion are being covered. John, do you have any comments to make on that? About
on the motion.
Just briefly about the motion. If not, don't worry, because I think it's something that we have to. I think we have to address that, because it seems strange to me that members of this panel have put forward this motion to be discussed at council on Wednesday. These members have been part of this poverty panel since it began, and have never made any comments about most of those things, apart from the fact that it was going to be, whether it was going to be an open meeting or not, which I said at the last meeting I would look into, and I have done, and it is now an open meeting. So I just find it really strange and rather disappointing that this motion is coming forward at this time, when these some members of who have promoted this motion and are supporting it have been members of this panel from the start and have never mentioned any of these things, as far as I can remember. So I'm just really disappointed about it, and I really don't think it needs to go ahead on Wednesday, but I'll be looking into that anyway separately. But if anybody has any other thoughts on that, thank you.
Sorry, can we just to intervene? Can we also address the issue about best practice as well, please?
Oh yes, sorry, Marianne. Yeah. Thank you, John. Would you like to comment on that about best practice?
Yeah, so part of the work that I've been doing behind the scenes is to look at where good practices in other authorities, and the action plan is reflective of that, or that's my version of that research. What I have found is that there's an awful lot of poverty type strategy work at upper tier authority level, very, very little at district council level. So whilst we certainly won't be the first, but we'll be one of a relatively small group of authorities that will have adopted a poverty strategy at district council level. And just a comment in terms of the motion, I feel that the administration has set its stall out very much in terms of making poverty or tackling poverty a priority, as we saw last week in the statement of intent that went to Cabinet, and that the work that Jess had been doing, Jess Bailey had been doing recently, and poverty is very prominent in that statement of intent.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Sorry about this. Councillor Miller, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up on a point you made about the motion. As far as I can see, I think it's only Councillor Allen on this working panel that's actually put his name to the motion. I certainly haven't put my name.
Can I just tell you that it's not? It's I think it's Councillor Chapman and it's Councillor Bruce Desarum.
Can I come in then, Chair?
Yeah.
I come in too, Chair.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, I seconded the motion because we did want you to open it up, because we did want to hear what was going on in and around the district. And that is why I agreed to second the motion. Since the motion was put forward, you have opened it up, of which I'm very pleased about, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. Does that mean that you're no longer supporting the motion?
I shall have words with my colleagues.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, I'd appreciate that. Thank you. Councillor Desarum?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, I also supported it because obviously it was clear it was important to open it up, which we have already done. And I think it's important that Council debates the issue of poverty. And clearly, I'm not sure what the issue is, but clearly Councillor Allen has explained it today that he took action in August 2019, and he's still concerned that it hasn't taken place. So that is my concern. I'm not saying it's your fault or his fault, but clearly there has been some communications issue, dialogue issue, by the fact that he has raised this topic today, and he's saying that he in August he raised this and he still hasn't had it processed. And I think the document myself, I haven't got any criticism of the document. I think it's been extremely well put together, and I must commend John and the team for doing so. So I've got no problems with the document. I am merely supporting Councillor Allen in making sure that the points that he made in August 2019 are brought forward to the council. That's really why I put my name to it. And obviously, as Councillor Chapman has alluded to earlier, we have opened it up to the public, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. So that's really what I wanted. And thank you so much, Chair, for your indulgence.
Thank you. Can I just say that I think John has just explained a few minutes ago that actually he has taken into account the report that he received from Councillor Allen. So I think that issue is covered basically. I mean, there may be an odd one or two things that we still need to look at, but generally speaking, I think most of those items that he put in his very, very long report last year have been included. So yeah. Is that all right, Councillor De Saram?
Yeah, absolutely, Chair. I mean, I had no problem with the report that's been produced, but clearly, as a colleague within our Conservative group has expressed concern, I didn't want to obviously see him disadvantaged, particularly as he raised it with you today, saying that he hasn't heard since August 2019. So it's not something that I raised, it's something that I'm clearly happy that you are dealing with, and I admire and respect the steps you've taken.
I think it's called lack of communication. I think that's probably what it is, actually.
I think it's definitely lack of communication, Megan.
We'll sort out the communication, won't we, Melly, then?
Shall we draw a veil over that one for a minute?
We'll do our best.
Absolutely, Megan. Leave it with us.
You. Okay, thank you. Councillor Miller, thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I hadn't finished my points. I mean, if the motion goes ahead, I'll be voting for it because I don't really see it does any harm at all. In fact, it raises the issue, and I believe this council, like many other councils in the country, should be declaring a poverty emergency to ensure this issue of poverty is given that appropriate parity of esteem with the climate emergency in the upcoming council plan. I think we need to commission a new poverty report to help inform the ongoing strategy and raise awareness among residents in the district of the pockets of poverty and the extent of the problem. As we know, the patterns of poverty have transformed completely due to the pandemic. The poverty report that was produced previously was a fantastic report, but I believe it needs to be updated. And with the greatest respect to you, Chair, I do share Councillor Allen's frustrations about what we see as slow progress on this strategy, and that might not be you, Chair. I think it's the fact that this issue needs to be at the top, in my view, of the priority list in the council, and that's not completely up to you, Chair. So it's not a criticism of you that we're making. All I would say is that I'd like to hope. I'm glad that you've opened this meeting up. I hope that you will agree to holding these meetings in the evenings so that Councillor Whibley and other councillors who work can attend. And I hope we have some informal meetings of the panel and quickly, so we can get these strategies in place by March, if possible. That would be fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm not sure quite what else to add to that, really, because as I said before to Councillor Allen, I was set a task. We're doing that task. We're doing it properly. We're doing it strategically. We're getting all the information together that we need to get together to get this strategy done. A lot of what is in the strategy and the action plan is being done already. I think that is often forgotten. You know, the urgency. We all know it. I know more than anybody what it's like to be in poverty. I've suffered it myself, and I'm sure quite a lot of other members of this council and officers have as well. So we know exactly what it's about, but we're going to do it properly. And that is my last word on it. We're not going to be speeding things up unnecessarily. if John and the team of officers feel that we can speed things up a little bit more, then we will do. But we still have to take into account we're having monthly meetings, which is pretty regular. You know, we could have had 3 monthly meetings, but we're having monthly meetings, and we're doing things strategically. And up until May, we've got speakers for each of those meetings. Now, I don't know whether John thinks that we can speed it up to cut out some of those talks. To me, I think that would be short-sighted to do that. But I'm only the chair. I'm only here to carry out the meetings and to try and make sure that this is done properly. So, John, would you like to comment on any of the points that Councillor Miller has made, or anything that I've said, actually?
So it is a priority for the council. It's been clearly stated. We can condense the timetable if that's the wish of the panel and meet more frequently, because your officers are ready and able. I'm not so sure about external bodies availability, but we can certainly do that. The updating of the poverty report is the sort of thing that you're getting and you're seeing from Andy today. So a lot of that data that Andy's provided today, other service leads that are leading on these 5 objectives will have similar updating. And once we pull all that together, that will be that effectively that updated statistics that will be part and parcel of the strategy narrative when we bring that forward. I'm ready to bring that forward to your next meeting if that's the desire of the panel. And certainly I don't see any reason why we can't have a strategy ready to report to Cabinet and for Council in March or by March, if that's a desire again of the panel.
Can I just ask you, John, how does it fit in with the speakers that we're having about the, I mean, if would it mean then that we would have to have even more regular meetings, more frequent meetings, I should say, every fortnight to be able to do that? And would members be willing to do that? Because, for example, we've got the next meeting is going to be on I think it's the 18th of January, and we've got the DWP coming. The following month, in February, we've got Citizens Advice coming to speak to us. So it's fitting in the other 3 officers, basically. So is that something that you and I can talk about after the meeting, perhaps later on?
Yeah, we can certainly do that. It may well necessitate longer meetings, though. And if the panel are happy with it, then that's fine.
Yeah, and I'd just like to get a feel from the rest of the panel what you think about that, whether we should be trying to speed things up a little bit. I always ask the question, why are we doing something? What is the purpose of doing it? And what are we going to achieve by doing it? So I think they're really important questions to ask ourselves. What is actually going to be achieved by doing this quicker? That's probably $1 million question, but that's what goes through my mind. I would rather just go through the process and do it as we've agreed, but I'd be happy to hear from other members of the panel. Thank you about that. Could I ask Councillor Chapman? I think you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Chairman, what is worrying me is coming up to Christmas. We're in the middle of the pandemic. A lot of people have lost their livelihoods and jobs. And we've already discussed that this is the time of year when people tend to get into very serious debt. We did ask last time at the meeting, we did ask Libby, I think it was, how Citizens Advice
come in, Poppy.
Hoping. Sorry?
Yes, my darling.
Who's?
Thank you very much.
I think someone has their mute unmuted.
Oh, yes, I think so.
All are not.
Thank
Leader,
you to
do not swear.
Thank you to Councillor Miller for grassing me up as my daughter brought in a cup of tea. My apologies for
That's
that.
okay,
Chair. I wasn't
thank you.
calling you darling.
Can,
It
can
was
we
my
just
daughter.
get back to Councillor
Chapman.
Chapman? Thank you very much.
Yes. Yes. No, so I am a bit worried that after the Christmas and the New Year, which takes us into January and February, that a lot of people are going to be in debt. Now, we did hear that Citizens Advice were short on telephones, etc., for people to get advice, which is why we want certain aspects of it, I'm sure you appreciate, to move along to help people over the New Year period. Yes, I understand we have to do things properly and in the long term, but also, you know, if we get very bad weather as well, to have people struggling out there when they can't even get advice or help, I don't think it's anything that any of us want, which is why in his own way, Mike has put forward the motion, and which is why we have backed it, because we see that after Christmas and New Year, due to the fact that people will be around and they'll be borrowing money that they can't afford to pay back, we've already discussed that, and they're going to need help and they're going to need advice. Can they get the advice? Are Citizens Advice Service up to it? And is there anything town and parish councils can do to help? So I think there's certain areas over the Christmas period or just after that is going to be very, very difficult. And I can understand where you're coming from in getting everything together and getting all your ships in the row sort of thing. But I think there is some certain things that we need to jump on to make sure that they're well covered, because I agree with what Councillor Miller says. I think we are in an emergency situation, and I think after Christmas it could be really, really bad. And having more frequent meetings, if it helps, yes, I'm quite happy to do that. But then that's up to you, Chair. But yes, I do think it, you know, after Christmas, it will be a bit of an emergency, and we need to know where we're going and what we're doing. And I don't think we can wait to March, because that's 3 months, isn't it, after Christmas? You know, and so that is what is worrying me, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. I just have to ask the question that, you know, being a practical person, what can we actually do? But that's, you know,
well, we asked Libby at the last meeting to have a word with Citizens Advice and ask if they had enough phone lines. Because I heard from Exmouth that they didn't have enough phone lines. She was going to ask and find out across the district if Citizens Advice had enough staff, enough phone lines to deal with emergency calls from members of the public. Because then, you know, Citizens Advice could get hold of Libby or someone else at East Devon, and we could, you know, the council could action it. But by sort of waiting till March, that's not going to be helpful if people, you know, can't pay their rent and can't buy food. You know, that is, you know, what I'm worried about is the helpline surviving and being strong enough for an outpouring of problems.
Thank you. Okay. John, do you have a quick comment to make on that? Because I think Libby has looked into that, hasn't she? I think she said that, I think she confirmed at the last meeting that they didn't have enough phone lines. But we've got our community hub. Sorry, John.
Last set of minutes, and I'm sure Libby would have acted on that. She liaises with CAB on a regular basis. So if there is a concern, I'm surprised that if she's looked into that, she would have normally fed back to people if she's obviously not been able to attend this meeting. But I will get a message to her such that she can update members on that finding. And I'm sure if there is a concern from CAB, she'll be doing all in her power to assist them with ensuring that customers can access their services easily and effectively.
Yes, well, that would be helpful.
Thank you. I realise that we've got 3 more speakers and I would like to draw this meeting to a close fairly soon. So can we leave it at that after the 3 that are up already? Thank you. Councillor Howe, thank you.
Well, just to pick up that point that Maddie's been making as well, the worst time for anyone is going to be January, February and March. If you decide to report after March, you're not, you know, you're not hitting the biggest need that people absolutely will need. It'll be getting better by March. Won't be brilliant, don't get me wrong, but it is January, February and March are the worst 3 months of everyone, whether you're employed, unemployed or any different. And there will be lots more unemployed at that point and all in financial poverty. So accepting what you're saying and not just doubting it in the slightest, Chair, it is just that point. You know, do you want to hit the need, which is January, or do you want to carry on and do something good for the future, but not hit the hundreds of thousands that will be needing it January, February, and March? You know, and trying to make that try, but you know, you've got to do it right at the same time as well. So,
thank you for that, Mike. Can I just reiterate that we are doing a heck of a lot already, and you know, officers are working flat out to help people in housing, in revs and benefits. They're working flat out already. So, you know, it's really important to remember that. I know you might not think it's that important, but it is the fact, and, you know, we've got to think of resourcing and all of that. You understand that. So we'll certainly have a think about it. I'll talk to John, I'll talk to the other officers and we'll see what we can do. Okay, thanks a lot. Councillor Miller, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to completely endorse everything that Councillor Chapman said. I would propose, with the agreement of the officers, that perhaps the panel could start having some informal meetings with officers. So, for example, this action plan, I had quite a few proposals to amend, which are not appropriate to be moved today, as we've had a long meeting. But, you know, I'm not calling for more regular public meetings. I think it's good and right to have those public meetings every month. I think that's perfect. But it would be good if the panel could meet virtually with officers informally, say every week whilst this crisis is ongoing. We need to be doing everything we can. And as a councillor, I want to be doing everything I can, as I'm sure you are, not to support officers, to bring in ideas, to feed back the experiences that the people in our community are suffering at the moment. I mean, I've had a huge increase in casework from people who are homeless and people who are really struggling at the moment. So that's my proposal, Chair. Do with it what you will, but that's what I think we should do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Miller. Councillor De Saram, and I think that's the last speaker for now, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully, last but not least, one practical suggestion that I have is that people could submit their, as you do in sometimes, people submit their questions in advance to the meeting, because hopefully that way we'll have the questions ready rather than take it as we go. And whilst I appreciate it's important to hear public speaking, clearly that does take up a lot of time, the initial public speaking. So perhaps whether Councillor Miller is right, when we have informal meetings, perhaps we could resize the agenda and have it more frequently so that we can actually cover all the points that people want to make. And I think certainly if we submit written questions in advance on the document, as Councillor Miller alluded to yesterday he did circulate a document. I did have some thoughts on it as well, but clearly that isn't for today's meeting. But I certainly think, yes, we should have more meetings and possibly submit your questions in advance so that basically we can get through the meetings quicker and hit that target, as Councillor Howe said, before the January, February, March period. So thank you, Chair, and thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Wow, what a long meeting. I'm really sorry because I know other people have got other meetings to go to, so that's why I wanted to move things along a little bit. So I'd like to just thank everybody for all your contributions to that. And we've just got onto the last item now, which is the date of the next meeting. And I've already mentioned that it will be on the 18th of January at 11 o'clock. It's already arranged, I'm afraid, so we can't change the time of that next meeting, certainly. And when you're having outside speakers, it may be difficult for them to come in the evening anyway. I don't know, but we can check that. But certainly the next one will be at 11 o'clock, presented by Lee Tozer from the Department of Work and Pensions. And should members of the panel have any particular issues they'd like to raise with him, could you please email me before the Christmas break to enable me to forward them on to him in preparation for the meeting? Thank you. It is essential, as I've mentioned before, for us to understand the work of such key partners and how they fit with our own poverty strategy agenda. So I hope that as many council members as possible will be able to join us at that meeting. And if there's nothing else anybody wants to raise, I'd like to thank everyone yet again. That brings our meeting to a close, and I would like to thank you all for participating, including any members of the public watching online. Can I remind all those present that the supporting officer will confirm when the meeting is no longer being recorded or going live, and until then your comments will be live to the public. Thank you.